Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Paterson Museum's webinar series. I'm Heather Garside, the curator here at the Paterson Museum, and today we have a very special presentation. Here today with me to have a chat about her new book is Kathryn Conti Salamone, who lived within a few miles of Paterson, New Jersey her entire life. She's a graduate of Seton Hall University and Duquesne University, and her professional life as a writer in both the private sector and later the healthcare sector bracketed her years as a freelance writer and editor while she raised her family in the 1990s. While residing in Delaware for 6 years, Kathy returned to New Jersey in 2022, settling in Central Jersey. Her lasting and loving memories of her Italian upbringing in Paterson come alive in her collection of memoirs, Sown in Silk City, A Life Rooted in Paterson, New Jersey, which we have several copies of here now in the museum's collection. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kathy.
Hi, everybody. It's a delight to be here. My favorite city on earth, not even New York is my favorite city on earth. Paterson is my favorite city. I have such fond memories of it, and whenever I'm in the area and I have an opportunity to visit the Great Falls, I do it.
I think we should kind of start our chat with a question. Can you tell us a little bit about like how, when, and why you decided to write a book?
Well, I guess the why is that I suddenly found I had a lot of time on my hands because I had retired in 2016 with my husband to Delaware, the southern part of Delaware. And suddenly I no longer had to worry about deadlines and interfacing with a lot of people on Zoom and phone. So this is a real treat, I must admit. So I went into retirement and I was looking for something that I could do that would allow me to use my writing skills. And I was able to find a collection of courses that were designed to help introduce people to the art of memoir writing, which is essentially creative nonfiction. So I found a series of classes at a local historical society, and I took those classes and then ended up taking classes through the Osher Institute of Lifelong Learning, which is a satellite of the University of Delaware. And before I knew it, I was writing about myself. I had never done that before. I had always been involved with writing and editing marketing pieces and promotional pieces, magazines, corporate brochures, etc., etc. So my focus was never on myself. And suddenly I had this opportunity and a Pandora's box was opened up, and I was able to produce some very interesting memoirs that were of interest to the man who was teaching these courses, Ray Tyson, who was a journalist at the at USA Today when it was first launched three or four decades ago. So as a result of him urging me, I just started to create a file of various memoirs, memories I had of growing up. And essentially it was from when I was really kind of old enough to remember things. And this particular book covers my years until I'm a teenager. So it was an adventure. It was an adventure, and one that I have enjoyed every step of the way.
And was it difficult to get started, or because you took those classes, it wasn't as hard for you?
Well, the classes eased me into it. As I said a moment ago, I was directed at coming up with ways to create a positive image for the multinational company I was working for, and then the two hospitals I was working for. So it had a different focus. My work had a different focus. And so all of a sudden I had to rethink and be a little bit more subjective and a little bit more open to the feelings I was experiencing and the people I was in a wonderful family with and people I met along the way. So it was a very different focus for me. Okay, everybody knows about the city of Paterson, uh, or at least certainly if you grew up in Paterson or grew up in New Jersey, Paterson is one of the most significant cities blessed with such a rich history. And it goes back to a young man who emigrated to the United States, wasn't the United States yet, the colonies. And that man was Alexander Hamilton, who, of course, everybody has a greater awareness of thanks to Lin-Manuel Miranda's uh, musical, which is celebrating its 10th year, as a matter of fact, in the city. So here comes this young man. He becomes the attache to George Washington. So he's with Washington during the course of the Revolution. And then at the beginning of our nation, and he was part of the uh, writing of the Declaration of Independence and then the Constitution. And it, it it's history from there on. So, so he happened to be traveling through Passaic County, and I have a feeling he was up on Garrett Mountain, and he looks down and he sees the river and he sees the Great Falls, and he turns to his buddy George Washington and says, "Hey, I think that we can build a city here, and it can be a great city, and it can offer a lot of people the opportunity to create a life here, and it can become a new manufacturing center will that we will be proud of and which will uh, be well known and people will want to come, as they say, build it and they will come." So and he was the first Secretary of State also. He was the mastermind before creating our currency system because we simply needed our own currency system. We had broken away from Great Britain, from England, and we needed to have money to carry on our commerce. So we have to thank Alexander Hamilton for creating our system of currency. Uh, okay, and then he, as I said a moment ago, he realized that there was uh, a potential here, and he determined that okay, again, this was a chance for the city to become a manufacturing center. And a lot of this that you see on the screen was happening later in the 19th century. And and toward in the middle to the late 19th century, that's when a lot of people started to come to the city of Paterson and looking for everything that everybody wants to find, a new way of life, an opportunity to become part of what we now call the American dream. And a lot of these people were folks who left families and sweethearts back in various countries, Italy, Ireland, Poland, um, and decided, okay, let me make a go of it here in this brand new country. And they left things that were very familiar to them and took a journey that was life altering, not only for them, but for their descendants. Ah, here's my paternal grandfather, who was only 19 years old when he came to this country. He had two brothers, and the three of them came, and the three of them settled in Paterson, and there are descendants of those two brothers who basically still live here in the city. He started out as a shopkeeper, and he was a place. His store was a place where people could network. And he provided fellow immigrants with opportunities to find temporary jobs, temporary housing. If they needed financial assistance or credit, I guess, at his store, he was more than willing to offer that to people because he was buying into making our country and providing a way for other people to begin to put their feet on the ground here in our country. And Paterson began to accept all kinds of people. And I think we um, can talk about the arrival of all these other immigrants. And he did well enough that he was able to move to another location, which happened to be in the heart of the Dublin Spring area of the city. And he operated that store from the early 1900s until 1954 when he passed away. And then the store was closed and the property was ultimately sold. And the famous Dublin Spring statue, and I think we have a photograph of that, or we have a photograph of my father's family coming up. There we go. I just love this picture because it speaks to me of that era, which I believe is around 1925, at which point my grandfather would have been 50 years old. And my grandmother, who was from Argentina, she would have been maybe 45. And she looks a lot older than 45. But after having raised all those children, I guess that's what you look like. At any rate, my daddy is the young boy on the left in the photograph with the eyeglasses. And I guess he had astigmatism, and he had to rely on glasses through most of his life. And I just think that's a charming picture of my dad and his whole family. And again, it just speaks to me about the immigrant experience and the desire of my grandfather and grandmother to document their family, to create this family portrait. And it just fills me with such pride that my grandparents went to a photo studio, a photographer's studio, and brought the kids, and they all wore their best clothes. And here they are. Here we are, new people in this country. Well, not so new at this point. And we've accomplished something, and we're getting our kids ready to move on and become people who are part of this country and who want to make contributions just as we did. Okay, now the photo of the Dublin Spring statue. This is just a classic in my mind. This photograph was, now you see the difference in my grandmother at this point. She's in 1954, my grandfather was like in his 80s, I guess, and my grandmother was in her late 70s, and she's slimmed down quite a bit, and she looks a lot older than she does in the earlier photograph. But my grandfather, because of the Dublin Spring statue, which was a creation of Gaetano Federici, who was the primary sculptor of statuary throughout the city. That particular statue was located right outside my grandfather's store. And through the years, he became the custodian of the statue. He made sure that, I guess, kids weren't jumping all over it and attempting to deface it in some manner. And he, in his obituary, it was specifically mentioned that he was indeed the custodian of the Dublin Spring statue. And I think the statue was created in the late 20s, early 30s. And the other side note, the other footnote to this is that my father's brother, my Uncle Chuck, who was the shorter little guy on the left, served as the model for the young boy who appears, who's sculpted at the top of the statue, and he has, I believe, a canteen that has water in it, and there's a dog beneath who's trying to get those drops of water into his mouth. Ah, here they are, my maternal grandparents, Michael and Chiara Canger. And Chiara is the Italian word for Claire. And I consequently have 2 or 3 cousins and their daughters who are named Claire. I refer to them as a power couple because my grandfather was a self-made man, basically, but my grandmother often consulted with him and offered her advice to him in terms of business decisions he would make. They came to this country also when they were fairly young, in their early 20s, and I think they had about $25 between them. And again, they left their region of Italy and got on the boat to come over to the United States. And this would have been 5 years after my grandfather Conti. They came in 1899. And the other significant thing about this is that my grandmother was about 8 months pregnant as she was making this transatlantic crossing. They already had a 2-year-old boy who was in tow, and he was being held and passed back and forth. But my poor grandmother is there enduring this transatlantic crossing, and only about a month later, after they arrived, she gave birth to the first American-born Canger, my mother's eldest sister. And I got to hand it to her. It must have taken a lot of grit to be able to say to her husband, "You really want to go across the ocean? You really want to do this? Because it better be good." After enduring, a pregnancy, getting all the way through it essentially, and then giving birth on the other side of the ocean. So you got to hand it to her for being brave, having the confidence in my grandfather, and knowing that somehow they were going to be successful. And he was indeed. He established a contracting and construction company. But the interesting thing about it is that he started out hauling junk. He was essentially a junk man. And I guess initially he may have had a horse and buggy sort of thing. And then when cars became available, he must have driven a truck that had a flatbed in the back, perhaps. At any rate, he's driving around and picking up junk, and somebody gets his attention and says, "How about if you forget about junk and end up picking up dirt and moving dirt?" And my grandfather said, "Oh, that's a pretty good idea. I think I'll do that." So that was how he got involved in what became a successful contracting and construction company that had a major presence in Passaic County. And I'd like to read a portion of my book. And let's see. Okay. Building a City and Beyond. Grandpa Michael Canger first drove a horse and wagon in Paterson, basically hauling junk. A man who was building a house asked him if he would move some dirt. He took the man up on his offer. Grandpa soon learned that there was more money in moving dirt. Within a few years, he established Canger Contracting and Construction in 1909. My grandfather later said that the Canger boys had dirt in their blood. The prime location of my grandfather's company in Paterson assured its growth. Canger Contracting and Construction landed contracts for snow removal on the streets and in parking lots throughout the city. My uncles Jim, Tom, Mike, Anthony, and Lou they're all included there. Um, as well as two older Kanger cousins, Mickey and Bobby, were all part of the company. The youngest of the Kanger children, my Uncle Al, was the only one of the Kanger sons who did not become part of CCC, Kanger Contracting and Construction. Instead, he graduated from the School of Dentistry at Georgetown and had a successful practice in Fair Lawn, New Jersey for decades. My Uncle Mike later established his own company, Kanger Engineering Associates in Fair Lawn. His company designed and engineered the layout of the growing community, including subdivisions, apartment complexes, and commercial developments. One of the primary things that my grandfather's company did was to lay pipe for the transfer of water and sewage, I guess, in all these new growing communities. And the primary one, of course, was Wayne, which was right over the border of Paterson. And so many of the initial homes that were built in Wayne were the result of the activities of my grandfather's company. And what happened through the years was that as the towns and communities outside of Paterson grew and moved farther north, up county, as we say, in Passaic County, it did not become, it wasn't feasible any longer for all the equipment and the staff and the materials to be moved from Paterson. So ultimately, after very successful run, in fact, at one point, my grandfather's company was made, it was either $1 million or $3 million, which would equate to about $10 million in today's money. So the company had a great run until the mid 60s, when at that point my grandfather had passed away in the late 50s and my uncles had taken over, and they decided that they would no longer operate the company. So sometime in the 60s, I think it was 66 or 67, they closed the company. But they, as I said, they had a great run.
So you've told us a little bit about, both sides of your family, and so I just have a quick question. With all of these different sort of stories, and they're all great, kind of like bouncing around in your head, what was your goal in crafting the book as you did? Like, how did you decide which ones to select and how you were going to represent?
I guess I selected those memories that were most vivid to me. And I grew up in a family that was just so filled with love that it was pretty easy to pick out, to record those memories. And the family was full of interesting characters. For example, I had an Uncle Curly who was bald, and an ancestor in my mother's family. I'm not exactly sure what conflict it was, but it was somewhere, I'm going to say in the 1880s. So it's going back to Italy. Well, he didn't want to serve in the military, so he essentially cut off his right index finger. So he wasn't able to pull a trigger. So I had, there were these interesting people who were in the previous generation who were interesting characters for sure. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to tell these stories in such a way that they resonated with people, not only people of Italian descent, but people who probably had grand families like mine was, and who, no matter where they lived, they could live on a farm or live, in a deep inner city or live in a suburb. And I'm convinced that people would think, oh, I had an Uncle Jesse like that, or I had an Aunt Mary like that, or I had a cousin Bruno like that, or a cousin Mary, whatever. I tried to grasp these kinds of experiences that any child who grew up in the 1950s and 1960s would be able to relate to, and would find it something that was meaningful to them. Um, and there were not only experiences that were meaningful, but people who were meaningful to me. And perhaps I could have an opportunity to read a little bit from one of the excerpts. Um, and but before I do that, if I may, one of the things that people uh, have mentioned to me after reading the book is that those who were familiar with Paterson told me, I remember exactly where that store was. And I remember going in that store. And in particular, a couple of people mentioned my aunt's store, and I'm going to read a little bit about her in a few minutes. Uh, and she pointed out to me that my aunt used to sell Dunkin' yo-yos, and I didn't remember that. And I was so happy that her comment prompted me to think back to exactly where they were in the store. It was great. It was great. Some people mentioned that they remembered my section of the city, Hillcrest, Totowa, and they remembered so much about it in terms of the fact that it was populated by Italians and Irish, and it was a great place to grow up. It was a great place to grow up. One person told me that the only thing she knew about New Jersey was the New Jersey Turnpike and the gas refineries. And she said that after she read my book, it Paterson came alive and became much more meaningful to her. And she thanked me for that. And somebody else who grew up in Brooklyn got in touch with me and said, it sounds exactly like the neighborhood I grew up in. And for somebody who writes, you get such a good feeling when a reader has that kind of response to your writing, be it a memoir or a piece of nonfiction, a novel. It just fills your heart with such pride, believe me. Okay, let me read a little bit about the sense of being part of this grand family and the emphasis on eating and sharing meals. I won't be able to read the whole thing, but I think you'll get a sense of it. This one is titled "Make Mine Al Dente." When I would stop by the stove to breathe in the comforting aroma of Aunt Maudie's sauce, and Aunt Maudie was the child I referred to before, the firstborn Kanger, the aroma of Aunt Maudie's sauce, and sneak a taste from her wooden spoon, I knew I was just one in a long line of others who had gone through the same motions over the years. With sweet aromas and robust flavors, food was like a member of the family. It gave meaning to life. The topic of food was baked into conversations like layers of lasagna, swimming in tomato sauce with ricotta and Romano cheese in 350-degree ovens. Conversations about meats, cheeses, herbs, and spices constantly connected the past to the present. From the secrets of mouth-watering meatballs to the glory of comfort food like escarole and beans on chilly autumn evenings, food came alive. The downstairs kitchen at 163 Paterson Avenue, where I was raised, became a prism of life through which older relatives recalled their youth while they envisioned the lives of the next generation. Aunt Maudie's table in the downstairs kitchen did double duty as a work area and dining space. The uncomplaining stove was in constant use, its burners flaming in unison, while she gently stirred a large pot of sauce. Brajol and meatballs skated in olive oil in a skillet fragrant with garlic. Lifting the lid on a large pot of water, she checked if the water was boiling and ready for macaroni to make its plunge. I won't read the rest of this, but in the meantime, my Aunt Nanny, who was again one of the older sisters, was there rolling out handmade dough so that she could then make handmade pasta of all shapes and sizes. And I remember her working with on this specially designed piece of wood that one of my uncles had made, and a rolling pin. Okay, not the standard one, but like a dowel, so to speak, a rolling pin, and she's rolling out the dough and rolling out the dough, and she's putting flour on the dough, and the flour is going up into the air, and it looked like angels flying in the air. And then she'd put her hand on my shoulder, and she'd leave an imprint of her hand. And I can remember looking sweetly up at her and marveling at how she was doing this and how she could very, very quickly make all this pasta enough to feed 6 people. And the pasta and the meat and the sauce was all brought together, and everybody sat down and had a great Italian meal. And there were never any recipes, never a recipe in sight. They knew how to do it, and they knew how to make food taste great. Okay, this is about her success as a shopkeeper. And this is titled Dollars and Cents. In the 1940s, my grandfather created space at our house for a store with a small kitchen and a storeroom. My Aunt Nanny ran the store for more than 50 years. In the neighborhood, she was known as Jenny. Aunt Nanny was a powerhouse. At 6 in the morning, she met the milkman at the door with his daily delivery. As they carried the day's supply to the milk case, the clinking of the quart and half-gallon bottles against the metal crates created bright morning music. Aunt Nanny held her own against hard-nosed salesmen, negotiating prices on items from batteries to toiletries. She precisely operated the rotating blade of the meat and cheese slicer, kept her inventory moving, and settled her books down to the penny every week. The stockroom was filled with boxes of macaroni, crackers, cookies, household detergents, canned goods, paper products, and baking needs. Before supermarkets, before BJ's, Costco, and Walmart, the neighborhood could rely on Jenny's. She carried milk, bread, deli meats, her homemade potato and egg salads, fresh fruits and vegetables, even scissors and 12-inch rulers in a little stationery department she had in the store. From 9 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, the door opened and closed constantly. I knew the man who came in to buy Lucky Strikes, waiting for 2 cents change from the quarter and nickel he placed in my aunt's hand. When Mrs. Martirano bought a pound of potato salad and egg salad, turkey breast, roast beef, and 6 of Zambrano's hard rolls, I knew she was expecting people for lunch. Mrs. Rizzo would come to the store, trying to remember what she wanted, but I knew she just wanted some company for a few minutes. The world of commerce fascinated me. I explored towering shelves of boxes and cans while learning how to read labels on Campbell and Del Monte cans. A frozen food case held national brands like Bird's Eye and Green Giant, but Aunt Nanny also supported neighborhood business owners like herself and bought frozen ravioli and manigot from a local supplier a few blocks away. Bursts of icy clouds rose from another freezer whenever Aunt Nanny reached in for quarts and half-gallons of Hershey ice cream and other frozen treats on a stick. I would be foolish to try to estimate how many sky-high cones she sold in the summer. Each chilled block of vanilla, chocolate and strawberry ice cream went from her right hand into the specially designed cone held in her left, and then into the hands of her young customers, all in one smooth movement. As I got older, I helped Aunt Nanny close the store each night, lock the door, and turn out the lights. In my aunt's grocery and general store, I learned about customer service, economics, negotiation, diplomacy, what it meant to be a good neighbor, and the meaning of a hard day's work. As educations go, it was absolutely priceless. She was one of my favorites, as was Aunt Maudie. Ah, ta-da! My mom and dad. They went to Central High School in Paterson. They, my father was a gridiron star. He was the quarterback on the Central High School football team, and he met my mother when he was about 17 and she was 15, and she had stars in her eyes. she really fell in love with my father, and and he fell in love with her, of course. And so they graduated in 1933 at probably the worst year of the Depression. They could not afford to get married. They ended up courting for the rest of the 30s and into the 1940s. And they were married in September of 1941, just before Pearl Harbor. My father's two brothers each served in the military, one in Europe and the other in the Pacific. But my father, because of the vision problem that he had from his youth, was not able to serve in the military. And I think that pained him for most of his life, because he obviously was really interested in participating in that war effort, and he was not able to.
I have a quick question for you, actually.
Yes, go ahead.
So, you know, we sort of talked about this a little bit already, but as you wrote the book, I'm just fascinated. You've got all these great characters, you've got all these amazing people and their stories. How do you bring that together in a book, in a cohesive book?
Well, the primary methodology essentially was to create that sense of history, and then to introduce the families, and then to pretty much take a chronological view of my growing up. And I guess one of my earliest memories was my grandfather, who died when I was 4. And then my other grandfather, my mother's father, died when I was about 8. So as I was reconstructing my life, it made sense for me to have these memoirs play out in a chronological fashion.
And did you feel any sort of worry, or were you overly cautious or conscious about how any of your other family members might feel about some of your memories? Like, did that
Ah,
a part of it?
okay. Well, I did have to consult with several family members to get clarifications on things. I shared the book, the draft, with a couple of family members. I didn't meet resistance to any degree. I think they were all just happy to see in black and white a history that they also had participated in, and people that they recalled so vividly, and friendships they may have had, because a lot of what I talk about in the book is the kids I palled around with, and the kids that I went roller skating with, and I rode my bike. And I had cousins who lived relatively nearby who probably knew the same kids I knew. I went to Catholic school, but several of my cousins went to public school. So there were some instances where our friends meshed, but more often than not, that wasn't the case.
Well, you started telling us a little bit about, that you're in the book. So that seems like a good point to segue into you.
There I am. And I honestly, this is around 1953. Honestly, I don't know if I actually remember this photo taken or because I have seen it so many times that it feels like I remember it. But this was taken on the steps inside the house. We were on the lower level of the house, and my two aunts, the unmarried aunt, and my grandfather lived until his passing. So our apartment was sandwiched in between the store and the upper apartment. And then above the upper apartment was this wonderful attic that I used to spend hours in because it had such wonders inside, from old pieces of furniture to lamps and clothing that was in clothing bags and old family pictures. It was like this whole new world. And I made the connection with all these different things that were from 50 years ago or 30 years ago, whatever. But it was just such a wonderful thing to be able to touch those dresses and open the drawers of those old bureaus and open the doors of the armoire to find all kinds of interesting things inside. So it, it it was just an adventure to live in that house, and it was a hub for so much family activity because the two elder aunts, one in particular, the first one born in this country, essentially became the matriarch of the family because my grandmother, the one who helped my grandfather with the business, suffered a stroke and some ill health in the 1940s. So she died 5 or 6 years before I was born. So I know nothing about her other than the fact that she was so instrumental in helping my grandfather with the business. And this was a time, essentially, when children were able to go out and play and do things with other kids and walk places and parents didn't have to worry about what might happen to them because everybody knew one another in the neighborhood, and all the kids knew the shopkeepers, and you could just get up and ride your bike or walk down the avenue and visit the various stores along the way. This one's entitled On the Avenue. Step on a crack, you break your mother's back. Step on a line, you break the devil's spine. So went the incantation that guided my kids along the sidewalks of Union Avenue. On the benches in the block-long city park, mothers cooed as they rocked babies in their carriages. Old men, their aged hands resting on their canes, leaned into close conversations as they swapped stories of years gone by. Before stepping into Nick's shoe repair at the corner of Union Avenue and Manchester Avenue, the pungent scent of leather and shoe polish tingled your nose. My friends and I barged in, clamoring for discarded heels we could use to play hopscotch. Nick wiped his leather-stained hands on a cloth he took from his cobbler apron. It was the same one I saw whenever I visited the shop. It seemed useless to me for him to use that same cloth over and over, but perhaps it was a shoemaker's quirk. He turned to the shelf behind him and sifted through boxes, struggling to contain the overflow of worn-out heels. After he dropped a few into our sweaty 7-year-old hands, we scrambled out the door. My Aunt Jo worked at the Hillcrest Bakery on the other side of Union Avenue at the corner of Manchester Avenue. Swiss and rye breads, brownies, Napoleons, and cakes waiting for ice cream, happy birthday inscriptions filled the cases. Few customers left empty-handed or without a smile and a laugh from Aunt Jo. On my way to First Friday Mass at St. Mary's, I always bought a thick crumb bun topped with a dusting of confectioner's sugar. I couldn't wait to file out of the pew after Mass for the walk back to school to take a bite out of that bun. Its fragrant sweetness was downright sinful. Customers lined up on Friday afternoons at Metzler's Delicatessen to buy their well-known fried flounder, fish cakes, or potato croquettes. If you didn't arrive by 4 o'clock, Mrs. Metzler would be sold out for the day. A no-nonsense proprietor, Mrs. Metzler's main mission was to keep the line of customers moving. As she reigned at the register, she would cast steely glances to her husband, communicating to pick up the pace as he filled orders. An imposing and ample figure, Mrs. Metzler kept her salt and pepper gray hair in place, thanks to an almost invisible hairnet. Her eyeglasses were as thick as the bottom of Coca-Cola bottles. Always alert, she was eager to nab any kid who risked pocketing a package of devil dogs or Twinkies at the end of the aisle. Woe to anybody who thought they could get away with pilfering from her shelves. One day, when I was about 8 years old, I walked alone to get my hair cut at the beauty shop across from the bakery. With a few clips of the scissors, gone were my beautiful bangs that grazed my eyebrows. What remained were bangs cut halfway up my forehead. This looks like me in the picture, but I couldn't have walked down the avenue by myself at age 3. What remained were bangs cut halfway up my forehead, the kind that kids would poke fun at the next time they saw me. I ran home crying. I could suddenly relate to the screaming toddlers I often saw at Sparky's barber shop a couple of blocks away. Mom, ever reliable in her consolation during childhood drama, wiped away the tears streaming down my cheeks, assuring me my bangs would grow back before I knew it. That was little comfort as I looked in the mirror. I vowed then and there the cracks and lines in the sidewalk outside that shop would never see my kids again. Okay. This is basically my mom's family, members of my mom's family, and I believe that that's my mom and my uncle Anthony and my Aunt Nanny, also known as Jenny. This was her birthday when she was maybe in her late 70s. And there's mom cutting the cake. And Uncle Anthony is making sure that first cut, that first slice is his. No, it would be Aunt Nanny's. He was just making sure that my mother did the right thing in terms of cutting that cake. And then the other photograph, this was a wonderful outside picnic table we had for several years, from the late 50s until maybe the late 60s. And you see parts of the grapevine that was overhead. And my grandfather and the boys, my uncles, had created this grapevine. They set up piping, and they must have planted the grapevine maybe in the 1930s, because by the time I was old enough when I was under the age of 10, it was pretty lush. It must have been maybe about 25, 30 feet away from the house. And all summer long, it would just fill in, and we would wait for the grapes to ripen in September. And then my parents made grape jelly. Oh boy, was that great. And we had jelly for a year until we could harvest again. So this is just an example of the family togetherness that was part of my growing up. And I can remember this day. I don't know if I took this photograph, but I can remember when all these aunts and uncles were together.
So, as we're coming to the end of our chat here, I just kind of was wondering if you wanted to sort of sum up your writing and publishing experience for us.
Okay. I started writing all these memoirs. I think it was 2017 and 2018. And it took a lot of dedication. And in the process of writing, I had really renewed respect and appreciation for novelists and writers who are so dedicated to their work that they set time up every day to write for 5 hours, or they lock in morning hours or evening hours to write, and are very religious about it and very attentive and just committed to it. And I tried to be as committed as I could, but there were times when I experienced writer's block, so to speak, and I just couldn't move forward. So the one thing also that I tried to do was keep each of these memoirs somewhat brief, to create the pictures, to set the stage, to present the experiences in a way that moved quickly. And I've had a few people say that it took them maybe about an hour to read the book, which is about right, an hour and a half. But they keep it nearby because every so often, when they need a little shot of nostalgia, they'll pick up the book and they'll read one or two of the passages of the memoirs. And the other beauty of it is that you can read them separately, if you will. You don't necessarily have to read them in order. And they still work. They still work. As far as the publishing was concerned, you really have to dedicate yourself to getting that done. And there's a lot of different steps. You can do it on your own. You can reach out to Amazon, and they can provide various services, editing, proofreading, design work, all of which you have to pay. But in my instance, I was able to get a lot of that done on my own, the editing and the proofreading. I called in other people to help me with that. I knew of a graphic designer who helped me create the cover. But the most difficult part was actually uploading the manuscript to the template that Amazon provides. And I needed to bring in my daughter for her technical savvy, and she was then able to get that done for me. And quite literally, once that was done, it appeared immediately on Amazon, and people could press the button, click the button to purchase it, and it was purchased. And Amazon contracts with a number of different local printers. So they print on demand, essentially. And so people could see this book on Amazon. They could say, oh, that looks interesting. I know somebody from Paterson, or I'd like to know more about Paterson, or I grew up there and I loved it. And they could just press that button, buy it, and within maybe 3 or 4 days have a copy in their hot little hands. So I guess you can tell that I have enjoyed this experience thoroughly, and I've certainly enjoyed the opportunity to talk to you, Heather, and to reach out to all these other people who I hope are watching and who I hope will buy my book because it's such a good read. Thank you so much. This was a pleasure. Thank you.
No problem. Now let's just make sure everybody knows exactly where they can find the book if they want to purchase it. So it is available, as you said, on Amazon, and you can get it both for your Kindle or in a print version, which is great. Do you have any sort of like quick parting advice for people if they're going to try their own memoir?
Okay. I guess you have to decide what you want to focus on. And and for me, family was primarily what I focused on because it was such a rich part of my growing up. And um, I was very subjective about it. I guess other people could be objective, but that didn't seem to work for me. Um, and uh, I guess you have to think about not only appealing to people who may be your contemporaries, but also perhaps people who are 20 or 30 years younger, and especially very young people who might not have any concept at all of what life was like in the 1950s and the 1960s. So um, there's I guess it's a case of like tweaking your memory, tweaking it so that it's something that a lot of different people can relate to. And I just want to mention one other. There is a particular memoir that talks about when my mom was working at one of the bridal shops in Paterson. And I mentioned several of the women who worked with her because there was one summer when I was bring your child to work day sort of situation. And I remembered their names and I included that in in the memoir. And I got a text back from someone and she said, "My mother worked with your mother. My mother was Jean Avidable." And she, it brought tears to my eyes like it's doing right now. I just was so happy that that person, that woman who I never met her, uh, read my book and saw her mother jump off that page. It was just great. It was just great. I hope I've answered that question
Yeah, no,
sufficiently.
definitely, definitely. Now I'm just finding my final question. So when is part two coming out, right? When are you going to do
I'm
the
sorry.
rest of your, you've got to do another memoir, right? For the rest of your life.
Well, yes, yeah, and I I have a file of many of my remembrances and experiences that pick up essentially from my I guess my college years and carry me forward to when I was raising my family and some memoirs about my husband who's sadly deceased. And I've just got to have that discipline. I just have to have that focus to sit down, pull them all together. I've had a couple of people read them and they're waiting. They're waiting to appear. They're waiting to come out on Amazon, and I just have to do it. So, if you like this book, keep your fingers crossed that I'll be able to get the next one published. This was great. Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with us here at the museum. And as Kathy said, I hope you our watchers are interested in the book enough to grab it from Amazon and check it out. And it's sort of just a great opportunity. If people want to connect with you, I just want to let them know that your social media contacts are on the screen. So if anybody wants to reach out about their memories of Paterson or even, about writing a memoir themselves, I'm sure Kathy would be very happy to hear from you. With that, I'm
Absolutely.
just going to say, thank you again, Kathy, and thank you for everybody who's watching and tune in again next time. So
Okay. Bye, everybody.